Well, hello and welcome to the Religion News Service podcast. We are broadcasting here today from the American Bible Society atrium here in the heart of New York City, one of America's greatest cities. We're excited to be here with you today having a conversation about what's happening in religion news right now. I'm Jonathan Merritt, senior columnist for Religion News Service.
And I'm Sarah Pulliam Bailey, a national correspondent for Religion News Service.
So today, Sarah, we're going to be talking about love, we're going to be talking about marriage, we're going to be talking about sex. These are sort of hot topics, aren't they?
Right. So we were chatting a little bit before this about a piece that we have been reading in The Atlantic by Michael Ware on is marriage making a comeback, which is pretty interesting given the stats that we're hearing about marriage on the decline, divorce being on the incline, birth rates going down. So what do you make of that?
Well, it's sort of an interesting article because you're right. In a sense, I think marriage, the American family, a lot of the conversation in the Atlantic piece was about the American family. And I think what Michael's point was, and this is a good point, is that the American family is not necessarily making a comeback in the sense that we're seeing more nuclear families or greater commitment to nuclear families in American public life, but that politicians are talking a lot about families on both sides of the aisle and about how we can really place an emphasis on family in American life. And I think one thing I would say is that I think he's right in the sense that politicians are going to have to reimagine what the American family is and how we can create laws that encourage people to form families, to form healthy families in American public life. I'm wondering, Sarah, you do a lot of writing on this.
Yeah.
What do you think?
I am skeptical in that on a practical level, I think a lot of young people are very skeptical of marriage. I think they grew up in kind of a divorce culture. They don't necessarily see a value or benefit. Why would you get married if you're not religious, honestly?
Yeah.
So I think a lot of people are tossing marriage aside.
Yeah.
So
and we run to that here. Both of us live in New York, and the culture here certainly, I think, is one where people are like, well, aside from the financial benefit,
why not cohabitate?
Cohabitate.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of people having that conversation, even within the church. I've found there are people within the church, which I know a lot of our viewers would find disconcerting.
Probably.
Another thing that I think people will find disconcerting, and you've written a piece on this, and I've written a related piece on this, is a new organization called Evangelicals for Marriage Equality. And this is a new organization that I think is trying to take some sort of third way approach. Maybe you can tell us a little bit about the organization.
Right. So the point of this organization is that you don't necessarily have to theologically agree with same-sex marriage. It's not like they're asking pastors to start performing same-sex marriage. But they're saying, even can you set your theology aside and get behind same-sex marriage on a civil level? And so they're trying to form those relationships. I would also mention that there are conferences coming up, one from Matthew Vines, who is actually trying to get evangelicals to theologically be in line with same-sex marriage. And then on sort of the other side, there's the Ethics and Religious Liberty conference on sexuality that's coming up in a couple weeks. So I think homosexuality and same-sex marriage, it's going to be an issue this fall.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting. I don't know that it's going to work. I'll say as a columnist and a commentator, I think I can say this. I don't know that this division between the law and theology is sustainable over the long term. Maybe it is, but I know there are a lot of people out there, they just can't get their minds there. I know that there's never been a one-to-one ratio between theology and what you think should be codified in the law, but this is such an explosive issue. To thread that needle, it's going to be really interesting to see if that's going to work.
Yeah, I think polls so far, the way I looked at support for same-sex marriage and then morality of same-sex marriage, and they go line in line. So I don't think that if this group is going to succeed, they have a lot of work to do.
Yeah. Oh, I totally agree with that. And you guys, you should be on the lookout with these two conferences that are coming up that Sarah mentioned, the ERLC's conference. It's going to come from a more conservative perspective, and then obviously the Reformation Project in Washington, D.C. shortly after with Matthew Vines, David Gushee, even Bishop Gene Robinson.
Yeah.
That's going to be coming from a little bit of the left flank,
Yes.
and it's going to be interesting to see these things come together.
Yeah, there's a lot going on.
A lot going on. Well, we are going to talk today in this episode with John Mark Comer. Some of you may know him. He's a pastor. He is the author of a new book called Loveology. So stay tuned. Come back with us. We're going to talk to him about love, sex, and marriage from his perspective as a pastor of an evangelical church in Portland, Oregon. Stay tuned. We are back here in the American Bible Society atrium here in New York City, and our guest today is John Mark Comer. For those of you who don't know, John is pastor of Bridgetown Church in Portland, Oregon. He is author of an interesting new book called Loveology. The subtitle, and I want to make sure I get this right because it's a mouthful, the subtitle is God, Love, Marriage, Sex, and the Never-Ending Story of Male and Female.
Well done, you got it.
Yeah, thanks so much for being with us here at ABS today.
Yeah, thanks.
I want to ask a question about Loveology. So it's sort of interesting. You're writing a book about love, but you're also a pastor, and I'm wondering what the message in this book is to the culture. If you think maybe that culture has lost sight of what love is, if you have a new definition of love, give us the main idea of this book in a nutshell.
Yeah, well, the church that I'm a part of in Portland, Oregon is about 70% single, mostly millennials. And so this is just a massive topic that I hate to even call it a topic, it's a worldview issue that we're just wrestling with, thinking about, praying about, talking about, teaching on. And I find that so often the church either says nothing about it or just says no a lot and really usually focuses on the morality side, what's right, what's wrong, rather than what the worldview side is. And so Loveology is essentially a theology of love and marriage and sexuality and romance and even what it means to be male and female a little bit. But it's really hitting it from a worldview aspect, trying to actually create a biblical imagination in people, kind of frame for people who follow Jesus or don't. Like this is what the scriptures, what the overall kind of narrative arc of the Bible from Genesis to Revelation, how they frame this beautiful idea of male and female.
But it does come down to sometimes saying no, doesn't it? I mean, you're a Christian pastor, so I mean, what do you do when somebody comes to you and says, what's wrong with having sex with the person you love even though you're not married to them? I know a lot of people here in this city who, even church-going people who'd ask that question. I mean, that does, in your view, come down to a no, doesn't it?
Yes, but I'm always trying to back up and ask the question before the question. Like, for example, with sexuality, we spend a lot of time in the church talking about where it's okay, where it's not okay, where we say yes, where we say no, but often we don't actually define what sex is. And so I find that we have two right now in culture, I think, at large, we have two massively different definitions of what sex is. I think as a general rule, as I would define how most people my age or anywhere close to it in culture at large would define sex as essentially play for grown-ups. So recreational activity between two consenting adults. And so the mindset is, hey, if it's mutually pleasurable, if we're both into it, if we're not hurting anybody, who the heck are you to tell me where I can and can't do that? And why would you say I can only do that in marriage? And why would it only be between a man and a woman? That makes no logical sense to people. So if the church just comes in and says, no, you can't do that. You can only do it in marriage. You can only do it if that marriage is between a man and a woman or whatever. It's absolutely illogical to 98% of people, including most of the young people in our churches. And so I think we have to back up and define what sexuality is. And as I see in Genesis and then all the way through the narrative arc of the scriptures from author after author in the Bible, I would overall define sexuality as a whole person bonding where two people become one, a joining not only of body but of soul, and a deep way to give and serve and pleasure and delight one another in self-giving love. And I think the only covenant, the only relationship that's strong enough to kind of handle that kind of a nuclear power is marriage, a lifelong covenant.
So speaking of marriage, obviously among millennials, we're seeing a decline of marriage.
Yes.
So how's that had an impact on the church?
Massive influence. I mean, for the first time, as you know, we now have in U.S. history, we have more single people than married people.
Right.
And there's all sorts of reasons for that. Obviously, divorce and then the rising marriage age. So, I think we're now 27 point something or other for women, 28 point something or other for men. And I think it's having a massive influence on the church because the nuclear family has traditionally been the backbone and really the spine of the church, internationally even, and definitely in the U.S. And so I think we're definitely seeing a change. But I think it's also a beautiful time for the church to be the church because church at its best is family. And so when you deal with, for the most part, a parentless generation, when you talk about millennials, or many of them at least feel that way, and kind of the erosion of the family or just the non-existence of a family for all sorts of bad reasons and good reasons, just career and life and education. I think it's an amazing moment for the church to actually be what it's supposed to be family, brothers, sisters, moms, dads, care for each other, and do life together.
Obviously, one of the hottest topics right now is same-sex marriage. So how do you how do you handle that?
Thanks for just lobbing that
yep,
easy one.
Yep, easy one.
Yeah, well, I mean, with a lot of delicacy, you know, we as a community, the church that I'm a part of, we stand for the ancient vision of marriage, and we see that in the scriptures all the way through, and we see that in the teachings of Jesus and the trajectory that God points us to through the scriptures, which we have chosen to live under their authority. And so obviously we know that is a quickly shrinking kind of perspective on it. And so I would like to say that we handle that with a lot of grace and kindness. But yeah, we stand for the ancient vision.
Do you think you do it differently in Portland than you would if you were in like Alabama or another state?
I've never been to Alabama.
Okay.
And so all I have in my mind are stereotypes.
Right.
And I don't want to jump to, I mean, yeah, we're at the end of the Oregon Trail. Yeah. We're similar to a spot like New York. We're in a hyper-secularized, hyper-pluralistic society, specifically when it comes to sexualization. Portland has more strip clubs per capita than any other city in America, more than Las Vegas. So it's a hyper-sexualized culture, hyper-libertarian, not in the political sense, but in the moral sense culture. So obviously for us, it is like we're very much a fish out of water, but yet somehow that makes sense in our culture, and somehow it's even understood and respected in an odd kind of way that I still can't quite figure out.
I want to jump in here then and maybe tag on to something she said and bring into the conversation something that you said. You know, Sarah wrote an interesting article for Religion News Service that got a lot of people talking about this new kind of gay Christian called the B-siders. So people who say, I'm a Christian, I self-identify as gay, but I believe that my faith leads me to a celibate lifestyle. And so they're living in sort of this different way that's sort of an in-between model for sexuality and
right.
faithfulness. Now, you've said here that the church at its best is family. One thing that I've heard these folks say is that actually there's been an overemphasis on family, and so they can't find their place because it always goes from, well, here's the singles ministry, and here's the married adult ministry, and everybody in between is sort of a, you know, they're like Shrek, and they just feel like this weird, like, ogre person that doesn't really find their place because everything's built around these family phases. So I'm wondering what you think about, as a pastor, how the church is organized around this idea of family and these sort of natural family stages. Where does a person like a celibate gay Christian fit into a congregation like yours?
Yeah, I would say beautifully. When I say the church is family, I don't mean the church is a place for families. I mean the church itself is family. So ironically, I think because of the hyper-emphasis on marriage that you get in the American church at least, often what happens is singles in general, gay or straight, end up feeling totally left out. So in a church like ours, where there's 70% of the population, even then, there's kind of this underlying, I think because there's such a high value for marriage inside most churches, what happens is there's a low value for singleness. And the problem with that is that Jesus was single and celibate. So was Paul, who's the most prolific, really the first theologian in the church and the most prolific author in the New Testament. These men were both, and a number of others, were both single, both celibate, and both seem to somewhat clearly teach they think that's the better option and the better way. So somehow, since the New Testament, we've lost an incredibly high view of singleness and celibacy, and in our culture, because of the high view of marriage, because of the even idolization, so to speak, of romance and romantic love, ever since really the Enlightenment and the Romantic period, I think what happens is single people in general, wherever they're at with their sexual orientation, end up just feeling totally left out. And so I think it's an amazing moment for the church to continue to celebrate families, but also to celebrate celibacy, celebrate singleness, celebrate singleness for a different kind of reasons, not just so we can bum around and not work full-time and do whatever we want, but to really devote our lives to something that matters, whether it be vocationally, kingdom-wise, whatever it might be. And I think in creating an atmosphere where the church itself is a family, not by blood, but by faith in Jesus, I think it can be an amazingly hospitable place for people who are gay or straight, but who are single.
You know, I want us to get real practical, John Mark, if we can.
Yeah.
We talked about like how love forms and what love is and what happens when love sort of unites in marriage. But there are a lot of people out there who've seen the shadow side of love. And there are a lot of people out there who said, you know what, I know this love you're talking about. I saw it in marriage, and I just don't love this person anymore. And I've tried everything I can do. I've been to all these little counseling classes, and I've done the love languages books or whatever. I've read everything that people give me, and the spark is not there. The love is not there. We're in a loveless marriage, and we're miserable. What do you do as a pastor when somebody comes to you with a story like that and says, they've lost that loving feeling?
Yeah. Well, in all honesty, and this might not be what you're looking for, but where I usually go first is to, once again, a definition of love. So we have redefined the word love to essentially be an emotion, a noun, something that happens to us, where most of us are passive. So when we say, I love somebody, what we actually mean is, in all honesty, when I'm around this person, I feel happy, I feel good about myself, I feel glad that I'm alive, I feel happy that I'm on planet Earth. That's what we mean by I love somebody, which is great, but that's basically the same thing as narcissism. And so there's a place for that, but it has to be at least joined to the idea of love as a noun, as a verb, as an action, as something that we do. And so if you look at how Jesus defined love, it was essentially through his self-giving death on the cross. And I have no idea what Jesus was feeling at that moment. It'd be easy to refer to poetry throughout the ages, but I don't know what was in Jesus' heart at that moment. Hopefully there was love, even as we would define that word, think of that word. But I think there's something to this idea of love as a self-giving action of your life, your blood, literally for the good of another. And I think that if you trust the way of Jesus, you believe that death comes before life. And you believe that we take on this kind of cruciform, dying and rising pattern, not just eventually in death and resurrection, but even daily and weekly and monthly. And so we're constantly following this Jesus pattern of dying to things and then rising into life. And so I think marriage, and even a loveless marriage, can be an amazing opportunity to trust Jesus and to follow that dying and rising pattern, dying maybe to your own needs and desires, even emotionally, and self-giving for the good of another, and just trusting and hoping and praying that somewhere in that, on the other side, is some kind of a rising. And I cannot tell you how many stories, and this is not, there's no promise, there's no like, do these three things, and and then your marriage will be awesome and you'll feel like a Twitter-pated teenager again. There's no promises. We're smart enough to know that's not how life works. But I have seen over and over and over again people choose to let that go and just start serving and giving to their spouse and finding shockingly on the back end some kind of a rising, of a resurrection of that love.
Well, John Mark, I appreciate you sitting down, talking to us. I know that our viewers appreciate this. You guys really should check out this book. It's a fascinating read. Loveology, God, Love, Marriage, Sex, and the never-ending story of male and female. Thanks so much for being with us, and we'll be right back.
Thank you.
Well, thanks so much for joining us today. We talked about a lot of important issues. We hope that we didn't just try to give you the right answers, but we helped raise some of the right questions. You'll see there's a comment section below this. We'd love for you to engage in conversation with us and with some of your peers there who've watched this, who've had various kinds of feedback. And just to begin a dialogue there, we know these are ongoing conversations. We especially want to say thank you to the American Bible Society. We're sitting here in their beautiful atrium here in Columbus Circle in New York City. For those of you who are unaware, the American Bible Society for nearly 200 years have been working to make the Bible available to every person in a language and format that they can both understand and they can afford. So we are very grateful to the American Bible Society.
And on behalf of Jonathan, RNS, thank you for tuning in. Join us next time.